Hello and welcome to another NGen Math 8 lesson by eMathInstruction. My name is Kirk Weiler and today we're going to be doing Unit 1, Lesson 7, More Work with Variables on Both Sides. So in the last lesson, we introduced this new idea of solving an equation that's got variables on both the left-hand side, which we're used to, and the right-hand side. We use the properties of equality to isolate the variable, to get it all by itself on the left-hand side, all right, to then turn our equations into sort of two-step equations. Today we're going to get more practice on doing that, and we're also going to be using the properties of real numbers like associative, commutative, and distributive to help us simplify the sides of the equations so that we kind of get to where we even began in the last lesson. Let's start though with a review problem just on having variables on both sides. All right, exercise number 1. Solve each of the following equations. Simplify each fractional answer. So many of these problems, we're going to actually have fractions as answers in them. So what I'd like to do is together, I'd like to work through each of these three. They each have kind of subtle differences in them that could make them more challenging. All right, just as a review of this process. So let's do letter A together. All right, I've got 6n plus 3 equals 3n plus 4. In order to isolate the variable, I'm going to subtract a 3n from both sides. 6n minus 3n is just 3n, plus 3 is equal to 4. All right, I can now subtract a 3 from both sides. That's going to give me 3n is equal to 1, and I'll divide by 3 on both sides. Don't do anything silly here. N is just the fraction 1/3. All right, so that's simple enough. Maybe the biggest difference between what we did last time and this time is that we got a fraction as an answer, right? 1 divided by 3, the same as the fraction 1/3. Let's take a look at one that gets a little bit of a negative involved here on the right-hand side. Letter B. 5x plus 6 is equal to negative 3x plus 2. So remember here what I want to do is I want to add a 3x to both sides because it's negative on this side. A negative 3 and a positive 3 will cancel. 5x plus 3x is 8x plus 6 is equal to positive 2. I'm going to subtract a 6 from both sides. Be careful here. 2 minus 6 is equal to negative 4. I'll divide both sides by 8. Right? Keep in mind that a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 4/8 simplifies to the fraction 1/2. So our answer here is just x equals negative 1/2. Now the final one that we want to look at, letter C, has 12 minus 8m equals 2m plus 2. Now here what I want to do is employ a trick or a technique that we had from a few lessons ago to rewrite 12 minus 8m as negative 8m plus 12. That's the way we're going to begin letter C. So let's take a look at that. So I get negative 8m plus 12 is equal to 2m plus 2. All right? It just makes it a little bit easier if my variable is written first. So I'm going to subtract a 2m from both sides. Again, be careful here. That's easy enough, but negative 8 and negative 2 gives me negative 10m plus 12 is equal to positive 2. I'll subtract a 12 from both sides. Again, I need to be careful with my negatives and my positives because 2 minus 12 is going to be negative 10. Oh, look at that. Negative 10 times m is equal to negative 10. Not surprisingly then, when I divide negative 10 by negative 10, I get a positive. I almost put a negative there, a positive 1. In fact, let me just remove that positive symbol. I just get m equals 1. All right, so primarily here we've got review, right? Nothing all that different from what we did the last lesson. Maybe we got some fractions involved. Maybe we had to take this expression 12 minus 8m, use the commutative property of addition to rewrite it as negative 8m plus 12. But it was all basically what we had done in the last lesson. Let's keep moving on though and start to do some problems where we have to not just use properties of equality like adding and subtracting from both sides, but where we also use the properties of real numbers, like the associative, the distributive, and the commutative properties, to help us simplify sides of an equation. Let's get into that. All right, so to begin with, the distributive property, exercise number 2. Solve each of the following equations by first using the distributive property to rewrite one or both of the sides of the equation. Do a formal check of your work. All right, let's go through letter A together and then have you work on letter B and letter C on your own. Letter A. So here we've got 2 times the quantity x minus x plus 3 is equal to x plus 11. All right, well, in order to really start working on this problem, what I want to do is distribute that multiplication by 2 through the parentheses. 2 times x is just 2x, and 2 times 3 is 6. Now, once I'm at this point, 2x plus 6 equals x plus 11, I'm back to just basically what I've been doing for the last couple lessons. I'm going to subtract an x from both sides. 2x minus x is 1x. X plus 6 is equal to 11. Subtract 6 from both sides, and x is equal to 5. Now, before we have you go on and do the next 2 problems, right, we should talk about how you can ensure that your answers are right, or at least how you can tell if they're wrong. Right? We can always take our final answer, substitute it back into the original equation, always the original. Don't substitute into this one or anything like that. Substitute into the original equation in a formal check to see if it's right. Let's do that together on letter A as well. All right, what I want to do now in letter A is I want to take my x equals 5 and just make sure that it makes this equation true. So let's do that. We're going to put 5 in for x, and we're going to see, is this a true equation? Well, first thing I have to do is do 5 plus 3, which is 8. Over here I can do 5 plus 11 and just get 16. 2 times 8 is 16. So 16 equals 16. Right, if I had done something at this point, right, wrong, if I had made a mistake, and I'd gotten, let's say, x equals 3, and I plugged it back into this equation, I would have gotten something that was false, that didn't work out. And it would tell me not where I made a mistake or how I made a mistake, but that I made a mistake somewhere, and I should go through my lines one by one to see if I can find it. All right, what I'd like you to do now is pause the video, take a few minutes, and work on both letter B, letter C, and do those formal checks. All right, let's go through letter B together. Here we go. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute the multiplication by 5 through that subtraction. 5 times n is 5n, minus 5 times 2 is 10. On this side, I've just got 2n plus 17. Do a little separation there. I'm going to subtract a 2n from both sides. Right? 5n minus 2n is 3n minus 10 is equal to 17. I'm going to add a 10 to both sides. That's going to give me 3n is equal to 27. I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and I'm going to get n is equal to 9. All right, and I think for time's sake, we're going to skip the formal check. Again, all that means is taking 9, putting it in here for n, putting it in here for n, and making sure I get the same thing on both sides. All right, in this case, that thing I think would be 35 that you'd get on both sides. All right, and it's good to do that formal check just to make sure you haven't made any mistakes. Let's do letter C together. Here we go. So we use the distributive property on the left-hand side, right? We're going to distribute that 8 through the parentheses. 8 times w is simply 8w, and 8 times 10 is 80. Simple enough. Here, though, we also have to use the distributive property on the right-hand side. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4w, minus 2 times 2, which is 4. All right, now we're back to just solving an equation with variables on both sides. So I'm going to add a 4w to both sides because it's a negative on the right-hand side. Negative 4w and 4w cancel. 8 plus 4 gives me 12w plus 80 is equal to negative 4. I'm now going to subtract an 80 from both sides of the equation. All right, that'll leave me with 12w is equal to negative 4 plus negative 80, which is negative 84. Move the screen up a little bit. I'm now going to divide both sides by 12. Have to be a little bit careful here. I've got a negative divided by a positive, which is going to be negative. And 84 divided by 12 is 7. So I end up with w equals negative 7. All right. Now again, keep in mind, because this can really throw students off. When I do the distributive property in any of these problems, I am not solving the equation. I am simply using a property of real numbers and multiplication, addition, subtraction, things like that, to rewrite one or both sides of the equation in terms of equivalent algebraic expressions. I'm just taking 8 times w plus 10 and rewriting it as 8w plus 80. I'm rewriting 2 times negative 2w minus 2 as negative 4w minus 4. But I'm not solving an equation until I start to use the properties of equality by adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing both sides of the equation by something. Everything else is just manipulating to get equivalent expressions. And that's important to understand because what we do next is going to be a bit of a beast. Let's take a look. Lots and lots of manipulation. Let's take a look at exercise number 3 together. Consider the equation 2 times the quantity x plus 3 plus 3x plus 4 equals 2 times the quantity x plus 20 minus x minus 6. Ooh, man, that got serious really fast, didn't it? So look at this. We've got variables all over the place on one side, variables all over the place on the other side, and we somehow want to solve this. Now, in order to do that, though, what we're going to do is we're going to forget about solving equations for a moment. And we're just going to use things like the distributive property, combining like terms, things like that to simplify the left side. Same thing to simplify the right side. Once we've done all the simplifying we can do to both sides independently, then we'll have these equations that have variables on both sides that we can more easily solve. So let's do letter A together. A says rewrite both sides of the equation as binomials, right? 2 terms, binomials in simplest form. So let's start with the left-hand side of the equation. Again, I'm not thinking about doing the same thing to both sides. I don't need to do that. I'm just going to use the distributive property to do 2x plus 6, right? So I'm just going to multiply through by the 2. All right, plus 3x plus 4 equals, now on the other side, I'm going to use the distributive property again. 2 times x is 2x, 2 times 20 is 40, minus x minus 6. Now I want to do some work where I combine like terms. So in that case, what I'm kind of doing is I'm using things like the commutative and associative properties to rearrange my terms, right? So I flip-flop the left-hand side, so instead of 2x plus 6 plus 3x, I have 2x plus 3x plus 6. Same thing on the right-hand side. I'll kind of flip-flop things so that we group those x's together, right? Now we're going to do the associative property. You don't have to throw the parentheses in here, but I like to do it to really kind of emphasize the associative property. I have now 2x plus 3x, which is 5x, 6 plus 4, which is 10. On the other hand, on the other side, I've got 2x minus x, which is 1x, and 40 minus 6, which is 34. So let's just pause for a moment to really take a look at what we've done. And again, I want to emphasize something. We have done absolutely nothing to solve this equation. All we've done is use the distributive properties along with the associative and commutative properties to simplify the left-hand side as 5x plus 10, and likewise simplify the right-hand side as x plus 34. All right? But we haven't sort of used the properties of equality yet until letter B. Solve the simplified equation from B. All right, well, let's do this together. This is just a piece of cake now. We've got 5x plus 10 is equal to x plus 34. I want to isolate the variable on the left-hand side, so I'm going to write a minus x on both sides. 5x minus x is 4x. Be careful there. Almost looks like we should just get the number 5, which would be weird. And then on this side of the equation, we're just left with 34. I'm going to subtract a 10 from both sides. Right? That's going to leave me with 4x is equal to 24. I'll now divide both sides by 4. And 24 divided by 4 leaves me with a final answer of 6. A lot of times students get confused or confuse doing things like the distributive property, combining like terms, all of that. They get that confused, understandably, with the properties of equality, where we're subtracting or adding or dividing both sides of the equation. Here, we are literally just doing that kind of algebraic simplification that we did in lessons 2 and 3 in this unit, right? When we were combining like terms, rearranging things to create equivalent expressions. 5x plus 10 is equivalent to this entire mess. And x plus 34 is equivalent to this entire mess. So all we do is simplify stuff, and then we use our variables on both sides of the equation techniques to get x equals 6 all by itself. This takes a lot of practice, so let's get some in the next exercise. Here we go. Exercise number 4. Solve each of the following equations. To begin, manipulate both sides of the equation until they are in their simplest form. Then solve the resulting equation. All right, let's do this kind of in stages. Let's do A together, then have you work on B by yourself. Then we'll do C together, which is somewhere down here, and then have you work on D by yourself. Let's do A together. All right, here we go. Lots going on the left-hand side. We've got to do 2 separate distributive property problems. So 6 times n is 6n, 6 times 3 is 18, plus 2 times 2n is 4n, and 2 times minus 4 is negative 8. On the right-hand side, we just have to do one single distribution. 3 times n is 3n, and 3 times 8 is 24. Now we have to do some rearranging of like terms on the left-hand side. So maybe I'll just kind of rearrange like this. There's absolutely nothing I can really now do on the right-hand side other than just continue to write it down. 6n and 4n is 10n. 18 minus 8 is positive 10. And all of that work, let's come out just for a moment, all of that work to get us down to this line was just to get us to an equation that we can easily solve using the properties of equality. But everything in these first 2 lines, we're doing no solving. All we're doing is manipulating to get equivalent, simpler expressions. So now let's go on and solve this one together. Let's subtract a 3n from both sides. All right, now we're using that subtraction property of equality. Bring the board up a little bit. 10n minus 3n is 7n, plus 10 is equal to 24. Now I'll subtract a 10 from both sides. I'll get 7n is equal to 14. Divide both sides by 7. And n is equal to 2. 14 divided by 7. All right, and let me bring this up a little bit so you can really see that solution. Again, using properties like the distributive property, the commutative property, the associative property to simplify the 2 sides, then using properties of equality to finish it off. Why don't you pause the video now, let me bring the screen up again, work on letter B on your own, and then we'll take a look at it. All right, now as always, I've done the easy one and I've given you the more challenging one specifically because of this subtraction, and we'll review the idea behind that subtraction in a moment. So let's go to it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute that 5 through this parentheses. 5 times 2c is going to be 10c minus 5 times 7, which is 35. Now whenever we subtract an expression in parentheses, what we really are doing is we're multiplying through by the negative 1. We're multiplying through by negative 1, and I'm having a hard time getting my pen to register there. So instead of having c plus 10, we have negative c minus 10. Now we'll distribute through by the 3, and we'll get 3c plus 21. All right, nothing that we have to do on the right-hand side, but on the left-hand side, we have to do a little bit of rearranging. Maybe I'll rewrite it as 10c minus 35 minus 10. And again, this side we're pretty much set with for right now. 10c minus c will be just 9c. We need to watch out here. Negative 35 minus 10 will be negative 45. And now we are ready to use the properties of equality. I'll subtract a 3c from both sides. That'll cancel. I'll get 6c minus 45 is equal to 21. Bring my board up a little bit so you can see what I'm doing easier. Add a 45 to both sides. All right, that'll cancel. We'll get 6c is equal to 66. Now we'll divide by 6 on both sides. And of course, 66 divided by 6 is equal to 11. Let me bring this back up so we can talk about it a little bit. Now, if you got through this problem and you got c equals 11, it means that you've developed a lot of great skills, right? The ability to do distribution, the ability to subtract a binomial by changing signs, the ability to combine like terms, and finally, of course, the ability to solve an equation that's got variables on both sides, right? These can be challenging because there's a lot of steps. I mean, take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps at least, depending on how you count, to get down to c equals 11. That can be challenging for math students to get all the way through something like that many steps without making a mistake. So let's get some more practice on them. All right, let's take a look at letter C together and then have you work on letter D on your own. Letter C all by itself is a beast, and so is letter D. Let's do letter C together. All right, in letter C, the first thing I'm going to do on the left-hand side is I'm going to multiply through by 3. 3 times 2x is 6x, and 3 times 7 is plus 21, just the distributive property there. Now here, this can look very confusing, but the way I want to look at it is I'm going to be multiplying through, if you will, by a negative 2. So negative 2 times x is negative 2x, and negative 2 times negative 3 is a positive 6. Amazingly important that that becomes positive 6. And then I have minus 41. All right, unlike the other problems, there's really nothing I'm going to do on the left-hand side for right now. It's just going to stay as 6x plus 21. On the right-hand side, I don't really have to rewrite anything in terms of reordering. I just have to do x minus 2x. That's going to give me a negative 1x. And then 6 minus 41 is going to be minus 35. All right. We're now ready to just do our variables on both sides of the equation routine. I'm going to add an x to both sides. 6x plus x is 7x plus 21 is equal to negative 35. I'll subtract a 21 from both sides. Again, watch your negatives and your positives. Negative 35 plus negative 21 is negative 56. Divide by 7 on both sides, keeping in mind that a negative divided by a negative, a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 56 divided by 7 is a negative 8. All right. Probably the trickiest part here is when we have a negative 2 times a negative 3, making sure it's a positive 6. Because of course, if that's a negative 6, then a negative 6 and a negative 41 gives me something different here, right? And everything starts to fall apart at that level. All right, pause the video now and see if you can get through letter D. All right, let's go through it. Letter D. On the left-hand side, I think the only thing I would do with 22 minus y is maybe rewrite it as negative y plus 22. All right. Now, on the other hand, on this side, I'm going to distribute through by that negative 2. Negative 2 times y is negative 2y. And again, I have negative 2 times negative 3, which is positive 6. Then I have minus y minus 4. Be careful. That's not minus y plus 4. The minus is attached to the y. It's also attached to the negative 4. So we just have that. Again, keeping that left-hand side that way, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm just going to rearrange the right-hand side just to have those y's sitting next to each other. Negative y plus 22. Negative 2y and negative y together will be negative 3y. And then 6 minus 4 is just easy, positive 2. Here we go. We're finally at the level where I can start adding and subtracting from both sides. I'm going to add a positive 3y to both sides. That'll cancel. Negative y and 3y is positive 2y. Plus 22 is equal to 2. Scroll up a little bit, subtract a 22 from both sides. Again, being careful here. 2 minus 22 is equal to negative 20, right? Divide by 2 on both sides. A negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 20 divided by 2 is 10. Now we get negative 10. I'm hoping you got negative 10 as well. All right? Let's wrap this lesson up. So what we mainly saw today was using things like the distributive property, the commutative property, and the associative property to simplify the two sides of the equation that we're trying to solve. Once we get it to a point where we've simplified the expressions on both sides as far as we can then go on to use our techniques that we developed in the last lesson in order to solve equations with variables on both sides. In further lessons, we're going to be using these skills in order to model a variety of different problems, and so it's going to be good to get some practice on them in tonight's homework. For now, I'd like to thank you for another NGen Math 8 lesson by eMathInstruction. My name is Kirk Weiler, and until next time, keep thinking and keep solving problems.